a year ago that thousands of young men and women began taking the first steps to achieving childhood ambitions to fly. As the airline industry virtually collapsed under the strain of COVID-19, its travel bans, passenger fears and grounding of aircraft, the world of pilot training faced its biggest crisis in history. As airlines laid off pilots and pilots in training were sent packing, many took to social media to ask, will it ever come back? And what do we do now? The British Airline Pilots Association, BALPA, had a clear answer. Don't begin pilot training. There aren't any jobs. Wendy Percy, its head of membership and careers, warned there were about 10,000 unemployed commercial pilots across Europe, including 1,600 in the UK, while many others were working part-time or on reduced pay. EasyJet trainees, they said, had no clear route to even a licence, far less a job.
In this situation, it would be irresponsible if we did anything other than warn you not to enter flight training right now, especially given the huge training costs involved. For those of you considering leaving paid employment to complete your flight training, it would be very prudent to reconsider such action at this time.
We spoke to training organisations operating in the UK, Spain and the Philippines and met cadets who began their training as lockdown began and asked, is there a future for airline training? Managing Director of the UK's Cambridge-based VA training, Alan Peaford, was critical of the stark warning, but he argued that there is a strong case for continuing developing new airline pilots.
So the set of circumstances that we face are very tactical in nature. Crises have come into the industry and we've navigated through them, but the advice that we give to people who are thinking of entering this profession to think of a longer horizon rather than the more immediate sense. We understand that BALPA clearly want to support their members and support their members back into employment after the crisis. However, it's a rather cynical interpretation of the, if you like, the motivation of the training industry. The training industry has always been very supportive of its cadets, and even if those cadets have to wait behind the experienced pilots, and there always has to be a blended demography between experienced pilots and cadet pilots.
The Flyby Academy in Spain has seen its numbers grow during the pandemic as pilots switched from training on airline-targeted MPL schemes, and its founder is puzzled by the short-term attitudes within the aviation industry.
Before I was involved in aviation, I was involved in engineering and construction. And engineering and construction has also gone through peaks and valleys before. I'm an engineer myself, but nobody who would ever dream of advising against becoming an engineer because there was a recession in the engineering and construction business.
Karen Barth, formerly a training academy executive, but is now the co-founder and director of Resilient Pilot, an organisation set up to help the well-being of displaced cadets and suddenly unemployed airline pilots.
Resilient Pilot was set up as a direct response to the COVID situation very, very early on. We initially saw that the graduate pilots, so those in training or just graduating, were coming out at a time where there were no job opportunities and we needed to provide some support for those. And then really quickly the airline redundancies started to be announced, and it was evident that it wasn't just support for newly qualified pilots that was required, it was support for the whole pilot community. Effectively, 2019 was incredibly buoyant for the airline industry, and we had, as an industry, had been looking at looming pilot shortages for things like the fact that we could see there were retirement humps coming up. So it was very clear that even if you just were to replace the pilots retiring, there needed to be an ongoing recruitment activity.
Alan Peaford argues that the threat of a shortage has not gone away.
The shortage of airline pilots prior to the COVID crisis was made up of two key factors. Number one, the baby boom retirement bulge, and without doubt those pilots continue to age. And secondly, the absolute increase in hulls entering the global market. If I just talk about the retirements alone, prior to COVID, the training industry was struggling to meet the demand simply due to pilot retirement. Now, as a result of going through this COVID crisis, in fact, more pilots have elected to retire. So in fact, the retirement situation is probably more challenging after COVID than it was prior to COVID. In terms of absolute fleet growth will continue. The aircraft manufacturers will continue to supply incremental hulls to the industry. That's a different timing factor. That will probably be delayed to some extent, but nonetheless, eventually that pilot shortage will return in exactly the same way it was prior to the COVID crisis.
But my point of view is that the underlying strength is undeniable in the aviation industry. So I'm not talking about, I don't know if it's going to recover in 6 months, 1 year, or 6 years. But I don't see any change in the desire of people to visit different places, to make business with different people from all around the world. And I don't see that diminishing. So in the long run, I cannot see any reason to prevent you from following your dream of becoming an airline pilot or an engineer.
If you turn that pipeline off, we will put the airline industry back again in future. So we need to keep that pipeline going, and we need pilots to continue to come into training and to continue on with their training.
The signs of recovery and the demand for pilots is already showing in Asia. Bhanu Choudhrie is the founder of Alpha Aviation, the largest independent training provider in Southeast Asia from its Manila base and with a joint venture operation in Sharjah in the UAE. He says that demand is now at 85% of the pre-COVID figures.
I think pilots are seeing this also as an opportunity when things go back to normal. When things go back to normal, we're going to see a large number of airlines, a large number of planes coming back into service, and there will be this demand. And I think that pilots will be required, pilots, first officers especially, will see a big opportunity.
Choudhrie says the industry is changing and that the changes could be for good.
We at Alpha Aviation in UAE and in the Philippines have got the regulator to bring in e-learning, and we are doing a lot of the classroom training by e-learning. So the students are sitting where they are and they are doing it via video link, and it is working really well. When you get into simulator training, even the simulator training has evolved. We today have artificial intelligence. We are using at Alpha Aviation artificial intelligence to evaluate the pilots and help the airline to determine the entire process of that pilot's training, what his score marks would be, not by only a training captain, but also by artificial intelligence.
The cost of training for a career as an airline pilot can be in excess of $130,000, and in most cases, cadets or their families have to stump up the cash.
I see that the people that are joining us, they come with their eyes fully open. They know what they're getting into. They wanted to get into the industry. There have been other times in history where it was not easy to land that first job. And they're enthusiastic about becoming a pilot because they just joined, but they are also fully aware that it's not going to be easy. So I guess that since our students are all self-funded, they really wanted to do this, and it was the time they had the finances sorted. So they said, no, now it's when I want to do this, and nothing's going to stop me.
Levan Ibrahim was born in Iraqi Kurdistan, and since starting his training, he became something of a poster boy in his homeland, the first ever Yazidi to train to fly commercially.
I got a lot of support from my family, from my friends, and mostly from everyone back home in Kurdistan. They were encouraging me to carry on going. Even till today as well, when a Kurdish person, Yazidi one, sees me, they recognize me straight away, and they're like, well done, we can talk about you, say that a Yazidi person has become something now, which makes me proud, and makes me push harder to continue the training, because there's always ups and downs in everyone's life, and sometimes with pilot training it gets so hard that you just think about quitting. But with all the support that I get from the Kurdish community and the Yazidis especially, They post my pictures all over Facebook, all like social medias. And I was on the news as well in Kurdistan, and also on the newspapers. So which makes me very happy and proud, and makes me push harder and not to give up, no matter how hard it gets.
Another role model is 19-year-old Sharifa from the Gulf, whose family encouraged her to carry on despite the crisis.
First of all, my family. They're really, if they're not supporting me today, I'm not here. No. So first of all, they're a big hand from my family. So yeah, and I'm grateful. I'm really grateful with that. And also in my family, no one is in this world in aviation. So I'm a first girl, or I'm gonna be the first pilot in my whole family.
The academies are working to reduce costs. Alvira's flyby has switched to modern Tecnam twin-engine aircraft, which saves significant fuel, and has based the school in an area of Spain with lower costs.
So what we did is we want to provide a place where we minimize the entire amount that the student has to pay to become a pilot. So the cost of living in Burgos, where we are based, it's a fraction of what it is elsewhere in Europe. Weather-wise, we are able to produce it in a much condensed time frame, and then time is money.
Well, the technology is also helping by cutting down some of that cost. So, we see in our situation in Alpha Aviation, we are pushing the governments to provide some, funding that helps. Banks are stepping forward as well. And airlines themselves are seeing that they are really investing in the talent. And that's how they have to look at it. So airlines need to be investing in this training. They need to be investing in technology.
If one looks at the profession and the return on that investment, certainly as you start to progress through a 5-year time frame, at the conclusion of that 5 year, the salaries are reasonable. The return on a cash flow basis is approximately that. There's no doubt, however, during that period that there are sacrifices. It's going to be a fairly lean and mean period. But yes, there is a return on investment. But it's not just about the money, of course. It's about the rewards of the profession, the satisfaction that comes with being involved in an industry that's so diverse, interesting. And there's many attributes about this industry that are to still commend it.
So is there a future ahead for those training now or looking to do so in the future?
There will be bumps, and this is not going to be the only bump in a pilot's career. And I see a lot of positive outcomes in the future for wannabe pilots. It will take time, but we don't know how long, but it will come back.
I actually met with a guy who's just finished training this morning. And what impresses me actually overall is the robustness about the individuals who've put themselves through training and how positive they are overall. But some people will have been impacted by that and their motivation being knocked. The opportunities will come. We've been there before. It's a little tougher at the moment. It's a little tougher to predict the return, but it will come back.